So what visual sociologists do is we try and read where that code is embedded in visual images. But it can be embedded in many different places. It's not a simple process. The process works something like this. So whoever creates an image is a producer. Right? Whoever took that image is a producer. The people in the image may be collaborators to that producer, but they're the producer of that image. And in fact, today, image production has become much more sophisticated than ever before because you can Photoshop almost anything onto almost anything. So you don't even need a reality to take a photo of. You can manipulate the image to represent whatever reality you want. You could do that, in earlier times too with paint. You could make paintings, for example. I mean, think of Salvador Dali's Melting Clocks. You've probably all seen that kind of art. But in terms of digital media, we now can make photos that look like there's a real representation when in fact there isn't. Okay, then we move on to step 2. You have a distributor. Sometimes the distributor and the producer are the same thing, but often they're not. Think, for example, of television channels. Television channels are distribution hubs, right? They make choices about what shows they're going to show and what shows they're not going to show, what time of day they're going to show them, how they're going to pitch them to audiences, how they're going to bring audiences in. Those distributors, by the way, there's a D here, those distributors are also people who are shaped by the code. They have their own set of values, of norms, of experiences in the world, their own identity that they bring to the table when they look at that image and say to themselves, what should I use this image for? Who's the appropriate audience for this image? Is this a good marketing image? Is this a good television program for late night or for morning show? What is that distribution going to look like? So they're shaped by the code, just as the producer is, but then they also use the code to interpret the meaning of the production. So the primary consumer also is shaped by the code. See the C in identity over there. They have to use the code of their day, of their circumstance, to simultaneously interpret two things. They don't know they're doing it, but they are simultaneously interpreting two things. They're simultaneously interpreting the distribution decisions and the original production. That's once through the path of how we try and decode images in visual sociology. We try and learn about the societies in which those images are created by reading those. Visual sociology has a long history, actually predates formal sociology. It goes into the earliest archaeology, trying to read the hieroglyphics on the walls of Egyptian tombs and trying to figure out what those hieroglyphics mean, the scenes of chariots and pharaohs and others, trying to read in those images the relationships between men and women, for example, or the relationships between the ruling class and the laborers, or the role that the priest class played in ancient Egypt. We're trying to do the same thing. We just have a more scientific way of sort of understanding the intersection points where we can get in there and try and read what code is being used. But this loop can repeat itself in what we call reproduction, especially today in your generation. We sample images all the time and use them for new purposes. In fact, we live in what I would call a postmodern image world, where the images that are used by you every day, many of them, if not most of them, are copies of copies of copies. They're so far from their original that there is very tenuous connection to their original anymore. What I'd like you to do now is to spend a few minutes thinking about a particular thing in this constellation of the code. Pick a value, pick a norm, pick an idea, pick a social institution, pick a stratification system, and spend a minute finding a couple of images that you think represent or easily can be read as that piece of the code. For example, Nobody's allowed to do this one I'm going to give you, but American patriotism, a value. You're going to be able to, if you put that into Google, you're going to find a bazillion images with that value coded onto them. The fourth way that this cycle can be used is through propaganda. And 4 and 5 are very similar there. But the crafting of images to try and get an intentional outcome from a group of people, when it's done by governments or for political aim, we call it propaganda. Right? And it would be easy for us to bring up, if you Google German propaganda, you'll find a bazillion pictures of German propaganda during World War II. If you Google American propaganda, you'll find some, but not as many, because we're not as critical of American propaganda. But you're exposed to American propaganda all the time. All the time. When the president comes strolling down the hallway to the podium and there's a flag behind him and red curtains and this presidential seal on the podium, that is all propaganda. That is all a creation of an image to provoke certain values, feelings, and responses from the audience. When it's not for a political aim, but it's for a market aim to try and get you to buy something, we call that consumption. We call that marketing. So most of the time, most people encounter images automatically. They don't even think about the way in which the code shaped the creation of the image, the way in which the code shaped the distribution of the image, or the way in which they themselves are reading the image. They don't think about that. You just see an image and all of that happens automatically without you thinking about it. Right? And that's the way most people go through the world encountering images.